Leaning too close. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start this study session today. I'd like to call to order the joint special study session of the City Council and Ad Hoc Water and Sewer Rates Study Committee for Monday, April 7th at 4:30 p.m. Mr. Reynolds, roll call for the City Council, please.
Committee Member Beauchamp, Committee Member Bowen, Committee Member Riley, Committee Member Smith.
Here.
Mr. Swain.
Here.
Council Member Lau.
Present. When you guys are talking.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Present.
Mayor Hepburn.
Present.
And we also have absent Castelfagita and Crosby.
Tonight's study session topic is the Water and Sewer Rate Study Update. This presentation will provide both groups with an understanding of the city's current financial position in these enterprise funds and look at some of the steps to be taken to ensure long-term sustainability of the systems. There is no action nor vote tonight on this issue. This is a presentation by our consultant based on the progress to date and a look at the different scenarios. If we were to stay status quo, solve our long-standing issues at once, or implement another path forward to make sure our water and sewer operations are viable. Mr. Wright, will you please, Mr. Wright from Raftalis, please come forward.
Thank you. Council, thank you for having me here tonight to present the status of our water and sewer rate study. I do have a pretty extensive presentation that I would like to walk you all through. And is everyone hearing me all right?
Perfect.
Great. So, Mr. Mayor, as you noted, tonight is not something where we're seeking the council to take any action whatsoever. This is really an informative session. And what we would like to focus on tonight are some preliminary water and sewer financial planning scenarios. We do have a large project scope, and there are many things that the city contracted with my firm to do for you. After the financial planning process is the development of cost of service studies to determine how much it costs to serve different types of customers. And then also the consideration of at least one potential rate structure alternative, the development of proposed rates for the period through 2030, and also water and sewer capacity/connection fees. And then finally, assisting you with the Proposition 218 hearing. Fortunately, all of the work that's been done on financial planning rolls nicely into most all of those other tasks and kind of gives us a head start on completing them. So I wanted to just talk a minute about the rate study process. And really, it begins down in the lower left with the rate study, what we would call rate setting framework, which is really working with a client and understanding the situation that they're in with their water and sewer enterprise funds and objectives they have for the funds. And then we move into the financial planning process, which is what we're going to discuss tonight, where we forecast future demand. We ask ourselves, what level of revenue do we believe we're going to earn if we keep existing rates in place? Revenue at existing rates. And then we forecast our future costs. And the difference between revenue at existing rates and future costs is a funding gap. And there'll be a lot of discussion of funding gap tonight. After the financial plan is completed, we move into the cost of service and rate design phase. And then finally, there's a constitutionally enshrined Proposition 218 process, which is listed there sort of under the final rate adoption section of this graph. Now, two things to keep in mind. Number one, down at the bottom, is throughout the entire process, many municipal utilities, many water districts, sewer districts, will conduct an extensive public outreach process, which is something the city's been doing to get stakeholder input. And then on top, you'll notice this arrow that says Proposition 218 compliance. Because Proposition 218 is such an important part of the structure here in California, everything we do needs to be kept, looked at within the context of, is it Proposition 218 compliant? This is sort of a similar slide, but what it looks at is the three major technical steps in a water or sewer rate study. We've already talked about financial planning. The second step, that middle box, is the cost of service analysis. And this is where we try to answer the question, how much rate revenue do we need to collect from different types of customers? And maybe that's commercial versus single family, for example. And we would determine that based on their demand characteristics, what sort of demands they impose on our water and sewer system, and how much it costs to serve those individual customer types. And then finally, the notion, or not the notion, but the third step is rate structure design. What rate should be paid by each customer class? Some utilities will select rate structures where everybody pays a uniform rate that is the same, regardless of what customer type they are. Other utilities will have rate structures that, for example, might be tiered for single-family residential customers and uniform for commercial customers. And there are lots of good reasons why rate structures can differ from type to type. We're not quite there yet, but it'll be something that we'll be focusing on as we move forward in the study. Here's our current project timeline. Tonight we're talking to you about financial planning. It is my firm's hope that by the end of April that we'll have a preliminary cost of service study done. And what that means is how to allocate costs between different types of customers, and also what might rates be for different types of customers. On May 19th, what we would hope to do is to come to council and present you with financial planning scenarios that are fully finalized, with a cost of service study that is finalized, with rates that are finalized, and with example bill impacts, so you can see how different types of customers at different levels of consumption will be impacted in terms of the bill they pay. And then if council was satisfied with the outcome of that process, we would ask you to authorize the issuance of a Proposition 218 notice. And that Proposition 218 notice will describe why you're raising rates, if you elect to raise rates, and what the rates will be through 2030 and how different types of customers might be affected. And usually there is a 2 to 3 week lag between a governing body issuing or authorizing the issuance of Prop 218 notice and then having it finalized and printed and postmarked and sent out to your customer base. If we stayed on that schedule, then what we might envision is you to have a formal Proposition 218 public hearing on August 4th. And this is where you would determine how many protests you received from your customers and whether there were enough protests to prevent you from raising rates, and that would be 50% plus one, or whether there would be enough protests, maybe whatever that percentage is, that would cause you to reconsider. And then finally, if you went ahead and had a public hearing and approved the rates, our timing right now is the rates would become effective on October 1st of this year. Okay, so as we move into the discussion of financial planning, what I have shown on this slide, or what Cameron and I have shown on this slide, are some inflation factors that were applied to your O&M expenses in the financial plans. And I think that probably the three most notable ones to focus on are, number one, down at the bottom of the first table, you see something labeled purchase water. And that is the cost to purchase your water supplies from Three Valleys. And of course, Three Valleys is a member of the Metropolitan Water District. They're a MET member agency. And you notice there an annual inflation assumption of 12%, which tracks with Metropolitan Water District's most recent rate increases. And so what we've done is we have shown that as a going forward cost of water for you. Now, I don't know the specific plans that Metropolitan Water District has for what they're going to be charging in 2030, But I think my recommendation would be it's better to be safe than sorry and expect there are going to be significant increases in purchased water. Another key inflation factor is labeled utilities, which you see at 7.5%. And this is associated with Southern California Edison and what they charge you for electricity. And 7.5% tracks with historical Southern California Edison rate increases and what the California PUC has been authorizing for them. And then right above that is benefits. And there's an assumption of 7% annual increase in benefits. And those benefits are associated with things like healthcare and also things such as retirement costs. Down below those inflation factors, there's another section of this table entitled account growth. And what you can see is that there's a very conservative assumption of customer account growth on the part of your residential and multifamily customers, basically 3 to 4/10% a year. And that's because Laverne is a community that's basically fully built out. And so an important thing to note about that customer account growth is that because it's relatively small, it's not as if every year we're going to be gaining a lot of money from increased water sales due to new customers coming onto our system. Now, within the context of financial planning, every utility has to make a determination of what sort of, I'll call them operational reserves, are needed to mitigate potential risk. So for the water utility, the assumption that's built into the current preliminary financial planning models is that we would like to maintain an cash reserve equal to 90 days of your annual O&M expenses. So, the question is, well, why would we do that? Well, one, there's always a potential in California for drought curtailments, which will limit your ability to earn water sales revenue. There's also the potential of a major infrastructure failure or something going wrong with a billing system that causes you to not be able to bill for a month or two. And so 90 days O&M is actually a number that's not excessive. It is often used by utilities that have rate structures like you currently do, which is basically a uniform rate structure with elevation zone surcharges. Some utilities that have tiered rate structures where they charge a low rate in Tier 1 and a very high rate in Tier 5 will maintain even larger cash reserves because they're subject to a drop in water sales, if, for example, even if we have a cool, wet summer. Sewer, 60 days of annual O&M expenses is currently the assumption that's built into the sewer financial planning model. Your sewer utility basically just has less risk than your water utility because basically what you're sending to LA Sanitation District is non-discretionary indoor water consumption, which is stable throughout the year. Utilities also maintain cash in their capital improvement fund. And a common metric that we use to establish a cash reserve for capital improvement is 50% of the 5-year average of forecast CIP. There's a lot of other ways that you could do it. You could set it at 100% of next year's CIP. You could set it as a percentage of your existing assets. But 50% of next year's CIP is a way to look at establishing a cash reserve that recognizes that your annual CIP expenditures vary. Some years there's very high, some years there's less. And doing a 5-year rolling forward average is kind of a way to deal with that variation. And then finally, we've built into the both financial planning models an assumption of debt service coverage equal to 1.25 times. And let me explain specifically what that is. When you take on debt, often, but not always, the lender or the people that buy your bonds or a state revolving fund loan will have some requirement that you earn enough money so that after you pay your O&M expenses, you will have money available to pay debt service. And the formal calculation is projected revenue less projected debt service is net revenues available for debt service. You divide your debt service into that and you get a debt service coverage ratio. And debt service coverage ratios could be as little potentially, I guess, as 1.0 for general obligation bonds for a really strong issuer, to possibly 1.1, and perhaps for certain types of debt, even higher than that. 1.25 is a fairly common planning standard. Let me apologize to you for the difficulties you see in seeing this, but hopefully you all have hard copies. This is a proposed water capital improvement plan for the period basically 2026. We show 25 on here, but for 2026 through 2030. And I think that there are two key expenditures to note. One is about 5 or 6 lines down, and it's called AMI meter conversion / AMI water loss project. And that is a project that totals approximately $2 million. And then lastly, the very last project on there, which I'm even having a hard time seeing on the big screen I'm looking at. Christy, what's the name of that final project there? Okay, and that looks like that's a $4 to $5 million project. Those are the two biggies in your CIP plan. And my understanding is that staff has spent some time with the ad hoc committee going over projected CIP. This is a look at sewer CIP, and really the primary sewer CIP projects are sewer relining, 2.25 miles per year, and those expenditures start happening in FY 28, 29, and 30, and they do sum to a significant amount, approximately, it would appear, almost $9 to $10 million. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this CIP is for the city of Laverne and for most utilities, capital improvement projects are the key driver of why rate increases might be required or external debt financing might be required. Okay, water financial planning. So why do we need financial planning scenarios? Well, in looking at the situation with the Water Enterprise Fund, we've come to the conclusion that if the city did nothing, if you didn't raise rates, you would find yourselves in a situation where your cash reserve situation for water, which is the combined operating and capital improvement reserve, would be almost negative $50 million by 2030. And we also analyzed the question, what sort of rate increase would be required in water if we wanted to catch up and make the Water Enterprise Fund whole and deal with any existing deficits we have in terms of inadequate revenues and deficits in terms of cash reserves, and also meet our required costs that we forecast through 2030, we think you'd need to implement approximately 110% rate revenue increase in 2026. Well, neither one of those options are realistic. And so we looked at what we think are two more realistic, keyword here is conceptual / preliminary financial planning scenarios. because obviously we seek counsel's input. One is to ask ourselves the question, what would happen if we had rate increases and didn't use debt financing? And then the second scenario, what would happen if we had a combination of rate increases and we sought $7 million in debt financing? And where that $7 million comes from is basically the cost of the AMI conversion and the major treatment plant project that we talked about a couple slides ago. So here is a scenario where we have rate increases, but we don't have any external debt financing. And basically the revenue adjustments you see there start at 35% in 2026, 30% in 27, and then they run through 2030. And the outcome of having rate increases of that magnitude is that they're not enough for us to have ending cash reserves that are positive and above zero. The only point when we get ending cash reserves that are above zero is out in 2030. And what happens when you have rate increases? They sort of build forward and they sort of compound on each other, which is why out by 2030, having this series of rate increases, which are a cumulative 179%, you finally get positive cash reserves. And then remember, we talked about financial targets, the notion of 90 days of annual O&M, 50% of projected 5-year CIP. And what you see there in the last line in this slide is something called variance from combined target. This is how far away we would be from meeting these reserve targets that are intended to mitigate risk. So this profile of rate increases does not work. So let's look now at a graph of this scenario. It's a little bit complex, but what you're looking at where you see the blue bars are projected total expenses. And those would be O&M expenses, debt service coverage, and what capital you can finance through rate revenues, sometimes referred to as PAYGO, CIP. The solid black line is revenues at existing rates. That's why it's stable. The dotted black line is what projected revenues would be if you implemented the series of rate increases shown on the previous slide. And what happens is that in years 25, 26, a little bit in 27 and 28, our revenues aren't enough to cover our costs. But by the time we get out to FY30, we're finally earning enough revenue to cover our projected costs. And what is below this graph, in a table directly below the graph, is what we forecast our ending cash reserves would be under this scenario. So every year that our revenues aren't enough to cover our costs, we reduce our cash reserves. In those years like 2030 where our revenues are enough to cover our costs, we increase cash reserves. What we wanted to show you on this slide with that table down below is what your projected ending cash reserves would be. Okay, scenario number 2, and this is the scenario that features a $7 million external debt financing, which would be received in FY26 and would be used once again for the AMI meter conversion and the major treatment plant expenditures that you have. And it basically has the same profile of rate revenue increases as we used in scenario 2. And what you can see is when debt financing comes online, we do have ending cash reserves, even starting in FY26, that are positive and above zero. We still don't have cash reserves that are adequate to meet our risk mitigation targets, but our variance is not as bad as in scenario 1. And actually, when we get out to FY 2030, you see that we have a positive variance when compared to our target. So, in effect, what happens is the scenario with no external debt just doesn't work. And it sort of drives us to this conclusion that, if possible, the city should consider potential external debt financing. Here is a graph of that scenario 2, and what you'll see is that it looks very similar to the graph you saw in scenario 1. In the early years, we don't have enough revenue to offset our costs, and therefore we draw down our cash reserves. When we get into, finally, in 2030, we do have enough revenues to offset our costs. And the table that's at the bottom showing the projected ending cash reserves is much more positive because we had that $7 million infusion. Sewer, we only looked at one financial plan. Your sewer enterprise fund is perhaps in a stronger financial position than your water enterprise fund. So we only looked at rate increases, no external debt financing. And that projection of rate increases, as you can see there in that slide, is 10% for 3 years, followed by 2 6%. That even potentially, I think, could be shaved down a little bit and not be quite as high as what you see. The good news is that under that profile of rate increases, you do have ending positive cash reserves in the sewer enterprise fund, and you have cash in excess of your risk mitigation target. This graph basically shows the same thing as the two water scenarios. But what I do want you to note, and this is actually an important thing to note, I'm struggling. I know I need to speak into the microphone, but I so much want to run up there. And if you look at the table below the graph and you look at FY25 ending cash reserves, you see a value of $14.9 million. And that's because your sewer enterprise fund right now has a significant amount of cash reserves. It's very good. And then you see as we go along the timeline through 2030, those cash reserves fall all the way to $3.8 million. And that's why when you look at the graph up above, in 2028, 2029, and 2030, you see a lot of gray. Remember, what that gray is that's the difference between revenues and total costs. When the gray is below zero, it means that your costs are a lot more than revenue and you're drawing down cash reserves. So with the profile of rate increases, I hope I can figure out how to go backwards, that I've showed you here, which I indicated to you maybe could be lowered just a little bit. Even those increases do really take your sewer fund from being flush with cash to having $3.8 million. And of course, these financial planning scenarios are dynamic. To the extent we modify CIP, to the extent we modify an inflation assumption, to the extent we change our target cash reserves and our annual rate revenue increase, everything moves in time. But this is the one sewer scenario we felt kind of showed you that currently have a good level of cash reserves in sewer. There's a profile of rate revenue increases, but it will draw that cash reserve down over time. Okay, what might be the next steps? Well, I laid out a schedule at the start of this presentation, and maybe I should have put the schedule back here instead of up front, but obviously we're showing you these financial plans, and they have some big numbers. And so I think what we really need is council feedback associated with these financial planning scenarios and the overall situation in your water and sewer enterprise funds, and how you wish to move forward. And then, of course, would become cost of service, come proposed rates. Customer outreach has been a continuous process, and then the development of the Prop 218 notice. That's my presentation. I'm sure you'll have many, many questions.
And Mayor, if I may, we have not enough mics for individuals to speak, so if you guys could share, or I have a handheld that I could bring over if that's problematic.
First of all, I just want to thank you guys. I know this has been arduous at Beth, and especially the fact that we have to increase rates somehow or another because of the fact we haven't been keeping up to pace. Although our sewer fund looks much better, still at the end of the day, we're to be in a better position. The water's a whole different story. So I thank you guys for that. And this is the input we needed to have so that we come back to council, come back to our community, and figure out what avenue we're going to take. So, Bo Ciampa, kick it off to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have several questions. On page 7 of the presentation, where the account growth is residential, you say that the city is pretty much built out, but there are still numerous additional homes and units that are going to be built within the city of Laverne because they have to maintain the RENA numbers for the state of California. So was any of that projection included? And then my second question is, on the Prop 218 notifications, is that a separate card or postcard or notice sent, or is that something that is included in the existing water bill?
I believe it's, I do not have an answer for your first question.
Okay.
And so that 0.34 customer account growth was not specifically developed kicking into any state of California regulatory requirements.
Okay.
As it relates to the Prop 218 notice, it's usually sent out separately.
Separate. Okay. And my final question is, on page 15, regarding the external debt finance costs, were any of the costs for financing included in those numbers, or is that strictly the $7 million of the loan itself? There's no interest or?
Oh, yes, ma'am, there is. And the assumption on that $7 million debt financing was 5% over a 20-year amortization schedule. And so the debt service associated that was included as a cost.
Okay.
In addition to the receipt of the $7 million, which would be immediately turned around to pay for CIP.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, I'm going to try Cameron Oakey, I believe, is also with Raftellus. He's got his hand up. Looks like he may want to speak as well. Cameron, like you're talking, but we can't hear you. Speaker, yeah, it's up. Okay. Cameron, go ahead and try again. Cameron, I've tried to invite you as a panelist. Could you try accepting that, please? His video's off. He's not muted. Where was that work?
Plug it back in. It's fine.
I haven't. Yeah, go ahead and.
Go ahead.
Council, yeah, I have a few questions. And pardon me, my voice is shot. We received this as a committee a few days ago. I don't know if you can hear me. And so tonight's the first time we're actually seeing it and hearing from the presentation. I'm curious on page 7, where the inflation account, I'm curious what this would look like for the last 5 years, because a flat line of the same percent in every category over the next 5 years just seems a little odd. Seems a little simple. If you look at the general, it's 3, salaries are 5 for 5 years.
That's kind of standard.
Sorry?
What was it 5 years previous? Is that correct? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I wonder what
What
this
it
would
look
look like for the last 5 years, because it
No, I
just
understand.
seems odd that it's
Seems
the
pretty
same
stru-
for
seems-
5 years.
Seems pretty structured.
Yeah.
And similar.
So that would, I mean, those factors have quite an effect on the expenses. And the purchase water, like what percentage of each one of these, when we show general and salary in each one, out of a total? And I like numbers. So out of $100, what would these equate to? So percentages are one thing, numbers are another. You did explain the difference between the water and the sewer on page 8. Thank you. One of the biggest questions I had when I initially got it, I looked over a 5-year period, and we've had this discussion as part of the committee, and there's been hardly any CPI projects over the last 5 years. And then you look at the one that I think Ryan presented to us, goes out fairly small, and in I think 2030 it went to $50 million or something. It was crazy. If I'm wrong there, feel free to correct me. I don't have those papers in front of me, but it was huge, a huge jump in like the end of a 5 or 6 year period. The question I really have is, we haven't raised prices, right? That's why we're here. This will double the water cost of, according to this, whoever gets water in the city, if we just take this flat line projection. That's a lot. in 5 years, you go up 35% next year. If you're spending $100, you're now going to spend $135. The year after that goes up 30. You go from 135 to 175. It's even a bigger raise the second year, even though it's a lower percent. Next year goes to 210. So 3 years from now, if you're spending $100, a customer like I am, I'll spend $210. That seems like a lot of money real quick. And it doesn't end there. I projected that in 5 years, if you spend $100 today, 5 years from now, you spend $266. That just seems inconceivable, quite frankly. And again, I won't go through the rest, but I'm still curious why I saw some numbers that we keep borrowing from the reserves for operational, because they go over every year on their operational expenses. They don't spend it on the CPI projects that were projected but never spent, but they borrow that money to go into operational because all the overhead, everything is much higher than projected. So I'm always curious when I see a projection like this, and then you go back to history, and none of it's really matched up, if that's the right phrase. Operational always seems to be over, and it takes precedence to CPIs, which are the foundation, the pipes and everything running under us today. And that kind of worries me because we have an older infrastructure, and we really, at least as far as my experience so far in the committee, we haven't spent money fixing or anticipating issues. And at 30, 40, as Ryan's pointed out, we have a system that's 30, 40, 50 years old. When something goes wrong and you don't get any water, that's going to be a problem. Electricity is one thing. Water, you heard in the fires, you heard in everything else. That's a big deal. So I am a little concerned of our projections because they don't always match up. But thank you so far for your input.
So first off, I just want to thank staff and the consultant for taking the time to put all this together. I just had a question, and I think it may be for either of you. But some of the CIP projects, they align with some of our water flow that we needed to update for like fire hydrants and fire department stuff. And then some of them were benefits for like the last project on 6th and Wheeler that's supposed to reduce our redundancy or our reliability on imported water. When do we start to realize some of those benefits from the app and then that water treatment center? And how do those get baked into these estimates?
My water treatment facility would immediately reduce our redundancy for the need for Three Valleys water, which would immediately make our Three Valleys bill lower. We would have an increase in electrical costs, which wouldn't be an offset. It still would be to our advantage to pump our own water and blend less. With that treatment facility, we would be able to do so. So there would be immediate return on investments. Whether that's included in the study or not, I'm not fully aware. Whether how much of a difference it would make annually. We haven't even begun the study, or it hasn't been engineered, or even it's not even preliminary stages of the project.
I'd like to thank everybody that worked on this also for the information. I am surprised. I understand the factors that go into it, but I am surprised that over 5 years it's going to be 166% rate increase. I think to help the council and the community better understand that, kind of like Mr. Bowen said, it would be nice to see how much the average bill is going to go up. That helps, especially the community, understand what's going on. Also, I think it would be beneficial to find out how Laverne compares to the cities around it. So if you show that Laverne still has lower rates than the cities around it, or if they're higher or not, it could be beneficial. If we're still low compared to the cities around us, it's easier to digest those increases. But I think that's really important to show where we compare, and then we can also see how staff and the council and everybody is doing. I also, not to call out anything, but on page, the sewer increase on page 19, I saw that the revenue adjustments for the would be 42%, but the cumulative was 49. I was wondering, is it 42 or 49?
Can you tell me?
19. Or I could be reading it wrong. Correct.
I have to apologize.
Okay. But it should be 42 probably.
So on the water rate increase slide, which is slide 13, you can see 26 and 27 is 35% and 30%, right? If my math adds up correctly, that's only 65%, but it adds up to 75% there, which is why when you were adding your numbers, they got so inflated. I don't know that these bottom numbers are correct for the cumulative adjustments, or it may be the way that it impounds, right? The interest, or the way that the percentage is impounding. 30% of now 135 would come out to a higher number than just adding them together.
But I think
correct.
you point out a very good thing, which is it will be important to check the cumulative calculation. I guess one question that arises from some of your earlier comments is, what communities do you think are comparable, as council believes comparable? And I also want to point out that when those communities are identified, and hopefully we can identify what types of rate revenue increases they're projecting, that information is going to be colored by a couple things. It's going to be colored by what sort of water supplies do they have? Are they tied to the Met system, or do they have their own groundwater? It's also going to be colored by what their spending history was and what level of rate revenue increases their governing body has adopted in the past. And so comparing percentage rate increases going forward, I think it will be an interesting thing, but I want us to realize it's not necessarily apples to apples without all of the underlying context.
Thank you for that. I do understand that, but I also know that we could find similar entities that could be compared to and stuff. And there are ones around here that are like that. In other cities, we have done the comparisons and gave that to the community and the council, and it was much easier to understand and digest.
Thank you. Raymond.
I also want to start off thanking all the community input that we've gotten over the last several months, and my committee members for being diligent and working through the information that is here. I'd like to hit a couple of points that some have been hit already, but try to dissect them a little bit more. On the inflation cost for the purchased water, that's on slide number 6. Basically, it was presented as the 12% is Three Valleys cost. And as we noted, Brian, that we should have less reliance on Three Waters over time and more internal pumping. And so I would think that that accumulative percentage ought to go down over time, being stagnant at the 12%.
Yeah, that wouldn't change their percentage rate increase. Our usage would decrease, but their percentage would still increase the same amount. 11.5 or 12% is what they've been historically climbing. Whether our usage would determine our final dollar amount that we pay them every year, but their percentage would still increase the same.
Okay, so that would be good to have a line in here to say, what is our actual water cost going to be? We're going to try to blend this with a variety of sources. What is our water cost going to be?
Yes.
Just looking at this, somebody would surmise that that's going to be 12% forward.
Right.
That should not be.
Yeah, so their rate will increase 12%. Our reliance on them may reduce our spending with them on our actual account balance annually.
Okay, good. And then as Rick and others have pointed out, that it'd be good to put this into real numbers for citizens. So what is my unit cost today for a meter? What is my unit cost for water? How much exact dollars would go up? And I know some of these are going to be average numbers, but when we talk to people, they want to know how much is my water and sewer going to go up, and even percentages. That's kind of a scary number, and real numbers maybe even more scary. People budget by real dollars, not by percentage. It'd be nice to know what the real dollar. I'm concerned with the financing debt costs. If we did that particular model, that's on page 15. Anytime the city or anybody, school board, finances a bond over time, that cost just accumulates and becomes so much more expensive than just the original project, but it just pay-as-you-go kind of. I think we really ought to look at the pay-as-you-go model a little closer. The bond kind of takes some of the initial hurt off, but I mean, you're paying for 20 years. I'm hoping to be around for another 20 years, but I think we ought to be taking a look at what the true cost is over time. And then as we go back to the very original scheduling, which was on page 6, you had mentioned that there would be full scenarios presented to, I believe, the council on June 3rd. Does this scenario show any additional ad hoc committee meetings, ad hoc committee only meetings between now and that next June presentation? Or May? Yeah.
So the ad hoc committee meetings are not on there. The committee was supposed to be basically done by June. So those meetings will have to come at a later time since we've extended the date. So this just covers their timeline. It doesn't cover our timeline.
It would be nice to be able to know what our timeline is.
We have to meet to go over that, and then we actually won't know anything until we actually get the next round, which would be the rates. So that would be sometime in May.
I'll put that on
There's some ish in there.
a lot of ish. That's it for me.
I think we brought up a lot of good points. I think some of the main points are making sure the numbers are correct on your, first of all. Also checking with the scenarios with the other outlying areas that have a similar system to us as how much water we use, like 28%. Probably Claremont's not good because they use Golden State's the most expensive water in the world. So probably not an idea, but I'm sure we can find a comparable city with what their rates are. I would like to see what our rates have been, like we said, and what they're going to be. The scenarios you've given, I mean, obviously we have a couple things. I think the rates as far as the water. Being in this for a while now, I'm not opposed to the financing portion of it. I think we should go more, not less. Maybe a 10 million finance. I think those numbers to see what they are. We do this all the time with debt, just depending on how we do it. Yes, we have to pay for that debt service, but I think it's important that we look that out, because that is a way to fund and they fund these all the time, especially for the large project. You get a $40 or $50 billion project. There's no way in God's world that we can get that kind of money. But again, at the end of the day, I think our residents, obviously, I really appreciate input from the committee, and you do need to be involved in this, especially when they come down to what these actually are going to cost, and especially our senior residents, large senior population, including myself. And I think it's very important that coming on fixed incomes, that we need to know what they're paying. The water's the big one. That's obviously the sewer. I'm not as concerned about. I think I would like to see on the other, and this is just an idea. We have the 10%, which is 26, 27, and 28. I would say the 10% increases are not unbearable. I would say that we, instead of the 6%, I would go with the 10% on each one, for the simple fact that we need to have our rates, instead of keeping going back to the well, and this is the frustrating part for me. I've been on the council for 10 years, and now Steve was on previous, and probably for Wendy also, is the fact that we've talked about this for a long time, and hard to catch up when people, especially in our present situation right now, where our economy's in a big flux. 401ks are damaging right now, and people's situations that it's just a shame that we're doing it now, which is great. I've always been frustrated the fact, why weren't we catching up with this as we go along? We should have been doing this years ago, just like our lighting landscape maintenance districts that aren't keeping up with the pace. So we're at a good spot now to do this. Unfortunately, it's going to be catch up. And I just think that we need to be very careful how we do that, make sure that our numbers are right on, make sure we do comparisons, not opposed to the sewer as far as increasing it to 10%. That's just a discussion with the committee. It's not a big one, but we need to have these flushed. These CIPs are very important, and water is going to become an issue. As Mr. Bowen had pointed out, some of our systems are 70, 80, 90 years old, and they are not going to survive, and that's where you see a lot of sleeving and things like that, which they're doing on the Golden Hills project. But at the end of the day, that may not work. You know, some of these pipes are from the original day. Yeah, I know, original day, but like I say, I think I've kind of push it over to you guys. I think we've got a number of things here. We just got to make sure we're transparent, make sure that we understand what we're doing with our rates, make sure that we're comparable surveys with our cities. Look at that SUR rate to maybe increase that, but also look at the financing and the debt obligation to push it up in order we can get some more money in order to pull that down a little bit. You know, obviously we're going to pay the debt financing, but to pull that down a little bit, maybe they'll make the rates a little easier. But we do need to catch up soon, and it needs to start immediately because we're way behind the 8 ball. And what's our Ryan, what's our water? 27, 28%?
Last year we're at
26. We could capitalize on that and reduce that.
If I could add two things on the debt financing, these projects since 2020, we've seen the cost of projects skyrocket, right? By locking in now, yes, you're financing the debt over time, but the cost of the project will be considerably less now as it will be in 2030 when we have the cash available.
Good point.
The second thing was, I forgot what was your second point there, Mr. Mayor?
Just the rates and the comparisons with other ones and the water we supply.
Oh, yeah. So as you said, Golden State, who serves Claremont and even Laverne residents here in Foxglen, they are extremely higher than what we have in Laverne. Laverne residents have been fortunate enough to pay a lower rate for a very long time. Unfortunately, the infrastructure has been aged to the point where we have to make changes now. There is the CPI index, which would be great going forward to base annual rate increases off of that, 3 to 3.5%. But as we're seeing with Edison and imported water costs going up 7 and 11%, even those CPI index increases annually wouldn't be enough to sustain going forward. It would still take a in-depth rate study every 5 to 10 years to make sure we're on the right track. The only thing is it would be a much less of a hit to the community every time.
Incrementally.
Mm-hmm.
Pro Tem Johnson.
One of my concerns with water is that we have plenty of redundancy to access water. I was on the council previously when the Three Valleys Miramar facility shut down. We had to get emergency connections to Weymouth I want to make sure that we have that capacity and we don't lose that capacity. Water is essential to everyday lives and to maintain that resource.
Yeah, so in the last 24 months, that Hillcrest connection to the Weymouth treatment plant, which is not actually connected to Weymouth, it's connected to the joint water line, which feeds Roland and Walnut Valley. So we actually would have to be purchasing the water not directly from Met and Weymouth, but from, so if we don't go through Three Valleys, the water comes from Walnut, Roland joint line. That water is 75% more expensive than Three Valleys water. That's why it's an emergency connection. Yes, it's there. It's a 60-inch pipeline that goes down Wheeler. We can get all the water we want out of it in case of emergencies, but it is strictly for emergencies due to the drastic cost increase. And that is just another local agency that is putting that charge on their customers. The Roland and Walnut customers are paying for that very expensive water that luckily we don't have to pay for.
Wow.
So I'm going to echo my thanks to staff and to our consultants for putting all this information together. I know it's been a long time coming, but I do think the information is good for folks to have. So a couple of things I wanted to point out that some other folks have pointed out, but I want to add a little bit to it. On page 7 or on slide 7, where we're talking about the percentages, I'd like to have a little bit more detail about how, again, these percentages were calculated, including, as was indicated, the state of the economy today. I know that that's not going to be a perfect crystal ball. Everything is in flux, but I would think that there was going to be significant increases that maybe are not accounted in here. So if we could take a look at that and make sure that we're identifying that correctly. I wanted to be clear that good data in is good data out. Bad data in is bad data out. So I want to make sure that we're on top of that. As far as the scenario, the comparison between scenario 1 and scenario 2, I think going down this path as we are learning and understanding how things work, I really think we need to make clear why the debt financing, as Mayor indicated, is something that we really need to look into and take a hold of, because it's not going to be feasible to just say we're not going to do it, because these numbers in red with no cash reserves, that doesn't account for any emergencies that could happen, any fluctuations that could happen that could leave us in a real big lurch. So I would echo that I would like to see what we could do with that debt financing and what that looks like over time. And then I think as we go forward too, I'd like to see what our plan is for educating the public, because I do think it is a complicated issue, because a lot of us pay our bills and we don't necessarily think about all the background that comes with it. And so to get hit with an increase, we're used to regular increases over time because of inflation. This is going to be something that's different. And I think it's important for people to understand that. I think to the extent that we are able to compare, I am an advocate of comparing with other cities. However, apples to apples, we cannot just look at numbers and say, oh gosh, this city only pays this much for water and we pay how much? That's ridiculous. We also offer things in our city that aren't offered in other cities. So I want to make sure that when we're looking at that, we're not just throwing out information just to rile people up or to placate them when that's not going to be accurate. So those are just some things that I think are going to be important. So I do want to thank the committee for sitting through what I'm sure has been a number of fun meetings having to deal with this. But I do want to highlight, too, the importance of our budget overall. And I know we'll talk about that more in our city council meeting. But we talk about these capital improvement projects. There have been times over the years that capital improvement projects have been deferred because other emergencies or other things have come up where we've had to deal with it. And so these are some of the consequences that can happen when we're not on top of that. So I would just ask that we continue to keep an eye on the ball in that respect so that we aren't falling behind in other categories as well. So thank you again.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Lau brought up some good points. We have done an amazing job with our capital improvement projects. As you see all the streets being redone, and it's very important, because if you let it go, as Mr. Ciotti said, the cost of business is going up every single day, and we're in a tariff situation right now where materials are going to become very expensive. Labor's more expensive. It's not going to get any cheaper. And I just want to make sure that the ad hoc committee is involved in all of these meetings to make sure you guys are all boots on the ground, and we really appreciate what you do. I know it takes some time out of your day, but it's important because you need to give us feedback of what's going on. I mean, we're keeping an eye on things, but you guys really need to come back with this, and these are all great suggestions. I think we need to make sure that whatever we give to the public, it's rock solid. It's rock solid, because we're all going to face this, and we knew the rates were going to go up, maybe not as high as we thought. Some are better than others, but at the end of the day, I think I just appreciate all your input. I appreciate staff's input. I think that we're on the right track, but I do want the comparisons, as Wendy said. I think it's really important that we see, but it has to be apples for apples. Kind of an oddity out there, but there's a similar cities just like we are, to see what their rates are, how they handled it and tackled it. Mr. Bowen.
On that, especially with looking at other cities and things, that's all well and good if we could show that we're paying less. But what I'm getting at is when somebody gets their bill, I personally don't care what they pay for in Covina. If my bill goes up $50, that's all that matters. And we have a lot of seniors, and we have a lot of people on fixed income. So, that's all well and good, but Councilwoman Lau mentions how we get this to the public. I don't care how you sell it. If you tell somebody their bill's going to go up $30, $40, $50 a month, I sold my whole life. I ain't that good. I hope you are.
Thank you. Any other questions or for the consultant, or are we good? So you'll be getting information on the May-ish meeting? May-ish meeting? Yes. So as soon as you guys will be involved in all the meetings that are concerned with this, and we really appreciate what you do. So, yes.
Just one question then. I know you were going to look at the cumulative numbers and make sure that those were correct. And I think with some of the input that's come from tonight's meeting, will that be incorporated in an updated presentation or updated materials that the committee will get to see and make further recommendations on?
Christy is going to have to answer that question.
Okay.
What I would say to you, though, is, pardon me, whether staff does it or whether you pay my firm to do it, the survey work and the comparison to other communities can certainly be done. I think that the work related to what's behind the underlying assumptions associated with the inflation factors is work that perhaps looks at historic numbers associated with Southern California Edison, for example, or a Metropolitan Water District. And it's work that tries to find information on what MET or what the California PUC is doing with Southern California Edison. That work can be done. And certainly the check on the cumulative percentage increases can be done. How that's going to be scheduled and presented to the ad hoc committee for their input is a Christie question.
Okay. Christie, do you have an answer that you want to give?
Everything that we receive within 48 hours after we review it before we give it to the committee. So it really depends on when we get it from them.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is we have a timeline that's been proposed in this presentation that anticipates an October start date for whatever increases in rates may happen. And I want to make sure that there's sufficient time between now and then, whatever the decision is, that there's effective communication with our communities to let them understand what those changes may be. And so you may not have an answer, and that's okay, but this is what I'm asking, is that staff go back and look at how long is it going to take to pull this stuff together, how much of it can be done in-house versus the need for the consultant to do it, but in enough time so they can also adequately plan for their May-ish meeting, so that they have the information that they need. So that we can stick to this timeline as much as possible.
We may have to push these dates too.
Yeah.
And we pushed it.
I think
that.
what Councilmember Lau is saying is that the end of April, cost of service, that's not going to.
No.
There's no way.
No, and then we also have, with Raftellus, we have a Yeah, so we do have a communications person that I will be meeting with this week to put in for 2 community meetings that will be probably held here or maybe the community center, depending on staff and community.
Are these with the numbers that we're proposing or with?
So that I believe it is going to be with the numbers that are going to be proposed, because we have to meet with the community before we even get ready with the Prop 218. We don't want to do the Prop 218 without the community kind of seeing it first.
I think that's what we're really getting to, is the fact that we need to have numbers, solid numbers, figuring out how we're doing it, sewer part financing, or not sewer part, but maybe a rate increase, but also financing arm, give us the options, but with some hard facts that are right on the money.
Correct.
Because otherwise,
Yeah.
we're not going to go to the public, we're not going to approve anything
No.
unless you guys have seen it, we discussed it, we've digested it and brought it out and say, hey, this is what we're looking at,
Yeah.
and we have to either,
So
get on our knees
you
and
guys
pray
will
or whatever.
all see it first before the community. It's just working with Raftellus and with Gina to get the dates aligned. I know Gina's going on vacation sometime in July. So it's just kind of getting all of those dates aligned, because we want Gina present. We want her to be there to help us with the community, and then with John and his team.
Excuse me. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but, as I listen to this conversation and all of the great input from the ad hoc committee members, as well as all of our council people here tonight, the notion of coming to you, as you noted, in April or May, with a finalized set of numbers, probably is a bit overly optimistic. And so you can have a January 1st implementation date. And it's up to you as to whether or not you would rather do that than October 1st. But my sense from the council members tonight, as well as the ad hoc committee members, is that this needs to be fleshed out before you ever issue a Prop 218 notice that you would feel comfortable with.
And no rumors going out. We need hard facts and figures. If it's January 1st, it's January 1st. I mean, we just want to make sure it's right. And make sure that we get it to our residents, get our committee first, us to our residents, say, this is what we're looking at. And we have to look at methods for our seniors, if there's methods that we can help them with to offset. There's a lot of things we need to look at. We just can't say you're going to get a 75 or 100% increase on your bill when they're on a fixed income, living in a mobile home community on, they're paying $600 a month rent, and they're getting Social Security of $1,000. I mean, this is just the facts here, so.
I think my last comment about communicating out to the community is, I know you mentioned that the community outreach would most likely happen, here or the community center or the like. I would also think about, is this the right place? Is this the right time? To the point that other people have made, we are a senior heavy community. So is it a meeting in one of the mobile home parks? Is it a
multiple meetings?
Yeah, or at Hillcrest, or for families with children, is a weeknight a good idea when they're trying to put kids to bed? So I just want to be very thorough about how we're communicating and very thoughtful and intentional about the audiences we're trying.
Even if we have to do multiple. Yeah, we've got plenty of places that they'll accept us and bring us in. I know the mobile home communities would more than happy to bring us in. Hillcrest, absolutely. But also, like Wendy said, it's got families, and being one of those that used to understand sports, this and that, and you get home at 7:30, 8 o'clock, you're toast. You're toast. And so anyway, I think everybody's got their marching papers, and we really appreciate all the efforts. It's just we're at the precipice now to find out how we're going to do this, how it's going to affect our residents, what our rates are going to be, and good. Thank you. With that, we are going to recess and reconvene at 6:30 p.m. for a regular city council meeting, and it's 5:47 p.m. Thank you all. Hey, everybody, can you hear me? Are you